wonderful to look out here and see such a great crowd. I see students from the studio arts, Irish studies, philosophy, colleagues from in and outside of Boston College, English, Irish studies. It's really wonderful to see such a great mix of people here. So I'm Sheila Gallagher, and I'm a professor of studio art here at Boston College and the co-director of the Guest Book Project. But that sort of puts me on equal footing with Richard when really I'm like under director of the Guest Book Project. Today I have the great pleasure to introduce our two speakers who will be talking about the subject of narrative hospitality, a subject close to both of their hearts. The theme is central to both our Guest Book Project at Boston College and the extraordinary work of Narrative 4, which was founded and directed by Colum McCann. More on that in a little bit. Before introducing Colum and Richard, I would like to say just a little word about the Guest Book Project for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, and especially our annual award for narrative hospitality, which we will be giving to Colum at the end of the talk tonight. So the Guest Books Project started in around 2009. It came out of a really quite extraordinary interdisciplinary year, a seminar, a completely interdisciplinary seminar that brought together poets, musicians, grad students, undergrads, and professors from all areas of Boston College, including philosophy, English, film, studio art, history, all to look at what is hospitality, what is radical hospitality, what does it mean to be hospitable from a variety of different lenses. Out of that, really, it was sort of based in the philosophy department, but out of that seminar came the Guest Book Project. And the Guest Book Project started, the motto of the Guest Book Project is exchanging stories, changing histories. And we started making small documentaries with youths in divided communities. The idea being that how can we ask grown-ups to do peacemaking if younger people don't have the opportunity to actually meet the people on the other side of the grown-ups division and exchange stories, but create something together. It was the idea that you have to have practice making peace before, on a young and a small level, before you can make peace on a big and global level. We then moved into sort of small story bites, and have since gone into 5 book publications, the most recent of which is Hosting the Earth, Facing Climate Emergency, which came out of a conference here we had in 2022. So I want to thank our guest book team. We have a really tireless group of young people who do so much for us, including Peter Klappis, Julia Franco, Jarrett, Fairhat, who helped organize this event and a lot of other things for us. We also want to thank our sponsors, the Irish-American Partnership, the Irish Consulate of Boston, who's so good to Boston College and Irish Studies and the Guest Book Project, as well as the following departments and areas at BC, including Irish Studies, Studio Art, the Irish Institute, the Philosophy Department, and the Center for the Psychological Humanities and Ethics. Brief intro on Colum, one of my favorite writers. Glad to see you here. Colum is an internationally best-selling author of novels including A Paragon, Transatlantic, Let the Great World Spin, Zoli, Dancer, This Side of Brightness, and Song Dogs, as well as 3 critically acclaimed story collections and nonfiction books. He's a regular contributor to the New York Times, and he lives with his family in New York City. He's here tonight because he's also the co-founder of the global nonprofit organization Narrative 4, which operates in 42 countries and uses storytelling to propel community action and change. One of the wonderful bylines on their website, which I think is wonderful, is stories are our common bond every person shares, the ultimate democracy, but with a touch of magic. A few words about Richard, great friend and colleague. Richard holds the Charles Selig Chair in philosophy, and he's the author of over 24 books of European philosophy, and he's edited or co-edited 21 more. His most recent, because this is his most recent, very most recent book that just came out about a couple of weeks ago. But his most recent other book was Salvage, which is a novel that came out 2 years ago. Richard is a beloved colleague, an inspiring teacher, and a person who really galvanizes community here at Boston College. His range and reach goes beyond Boston College. Amongst other things, he was a served as a former member of the Irish Arts Council, as well as the Higher Education Council in Ireland. And he also negotiated a number of proposals for the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement. We are lucky to have him here. I'm going to say that we are, after their conversation, which I'm very much looking forward to, we'll be presenting Colum an award, but I also want to make a plug that there will be a book signing outside, and there's some wonderful books by both Richard and Colum out there, and so please stop by there. So without much more, I'd like to say thank you, both of you, for being here, and I look forward to seeing you here.
Thank you so much, Sheila. So this is going to be a very conversational conversation, very informal. And I'm going to start by asking Colum to tell us about Narrative 4, because I think many of you here will not know about that. And then we'll move on to a discussion of some of his fiction, and indeed non-fiction, including American Mother, which has been published this year. Which I think has very interesting connections with the whole question of narrative hospitality, which is the subject of our discussion tonight, and is the topic of, and the reason for our award. It's the Guest Book Annual Award in Narrative Hospitality. The first year we gave it, 2022, was to Mary Robinson, and we had a conference here called Hosting Art, and it's the proceedings from that conference that are published in the book with Routledge that has just come out. And then last year we gave the award to Brian O'Donovan, and his wonderful partner is here tonight, Lindsay, who, as many of you, and I'm sure all of you know, was just a sort of a national feature, and certainly a municipal feature of Irish culture in North America. The Celtic Sojourn was a radio program which he broadcast every Saturday on WBGH. And he ran concerts with Lindsay every year on Irish culture and music. And there's a Brian O'Donovan Day, I think it's December the 16th, here in Boston, to mark his contribution to our local culture. In any case, he was the second worthy recipient, and Colum is our third. She will be presenting him with the award at the end of our conversation. So just to start, two very quick anecdotes, and then we'll talk about Narrative 4. The first time I heard of Colum was in
That was the jail. That was the jail. When you bailed me out.
No, when I tried to give you an award, and I didn't succeed. It was the Irish Times Literary Award. It was just starting off, and Colum's first book was it 1996? 1996, I think it was. 1994. And anyway, I was on the jury, and Colum's book was one of the nominated volumes, and we went back and forth, and I didn't succeed in getting him the award, and I always felt terribly guilty. And so as soon as we set up our Guest Book Award for Narrative Hospitality, I said, and finally my day has come. I'll be able to give Colum the award, and I couldn't give him in 1994, which was for his fiction. This award, of course, is for Narrative 4. But Narrative 4, his work in Narrative 4, spills out into his fiction and his non-fiction publications, as we'll see in our exchange. The second and last time I saw you a few times, but that I recall was in an event in NYU in New York, and I said to Colum, it was shortly after you published Great Word Spins. Anyway, we were chatting about that, and I said, what are you doing now? And he said, I've just set up a non-profit movement called Narrative 4 with Salman Rushdie. And we believe that by exchanging stories you can make peace and promote and engage in radical empathy. So I said, that's exactly what we're doing. And so we bonded yet again, and we established a partnership. And this is part of the ongoing partnership. Our conversation tonight, I mean, what Colum does in Narrative 4 is bigger and better than we've ever done in Guestbook. I mean, we have slight differences. We're probably more academic, and we work with video exchanges, whereas Colum's work is in 44 different countries, Latin America, Africa, it's all over, and he works, as he'd explain in a moment better than I could, in schools and on the ground. And that's a huge outreach, 100 employees, and I don't know where he gets time to write fiction, but anyway, we discussed that too. So my opening question to you, Colum, is why and how did you set up Narrative 4?
Ooh, why and how? Well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight in the rain. We brought the weather with us. I mean, it's nasty out, right? I was driving up from Connecticut today, and nobody's going to be there this evening. So I do deeply appreciate everyone coming out. I hope we can have a conversation. I hope it will be your conversation too, and ask questions. And I'm really honoured to be here with you. I have great admiration for. And also nice to be back at BC. I've been here a few times. Jim Smith was the first one to bring me here many moons ago, right? How many? 2001. 2001? Okay, so not so bad. But before some of these were born, right?
You were a teenager.
2001, we didn't have Narrative 4 on the horizon. In fact, it wasn't until over 10 years later that I met with a woman by the name of Lisa Consiglio, who is an activist and a thinker in and around the literary scene in Colorado. And we brought a number of writers together, and we started pondering the notion of stories and storytelling, and that sort of nuclear energy that can come from sharing stories with one another. She had reinvigorated this old theatre technique where you step into my shoes and I step into yours, so we would tell stories to one another. And then we would go back into a room, and I would say, hi, my name is Richard, and you'd say,
My name is Colum.
so even just saying that, not even just thinking it, but saying it does something, right? Because when you tell your own story, it's great. The brain is like a circus, and you're accessing all sorts of things. But when you tell somebody else's story, the brain is like several carnivals going off all at once, and you're accessing memory, you're accessing imagination, you're accessing empathy. You're also dealing with all stuff, and you've given your story to somebody else, but now you're holding things. And we found that there was something nuclear in this particular moment. And there was Toby Wolfe was there, and Terry Tempest Williams, and Ishmael Bea, and a lot of really significant thinkers and writers, Darrell Burke, and so we began to embark on this journey, which started up and down the Roaring Fork Valley in Colorado, but soon went to Haiti, soon went to New Orleans, then soon went to Ireland, and now is in all these countries around the world with a significant number of employees. Can I just point out Ashley and Evan, who are there tonight, and they'll answer questions better than I can about this this wonderful organisation, which is unfortunately and fortunately right at the cusp of a huge explosion, because we're in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation amongst young people. And the real trust of the organisation, in a very simple way, we say is that stories lead to action, lead to change. So, for example, what we do, so we're in Ireland, we're in 12 countries in Africa, we're in Mexico, we're all across the United States. One of the signature sort of exchanges that we would do is we'd bring kids from the South Bronx together with kids from Eastern Kentucky. Okay, so you'd imagine, just think about it, right? All these kids are black and or immigrant, all these kids are white and or Cherokee, all these kids are urban, these kids are rural, these kids are traditionally blue, these kids are traditionally red. You get them in a room together, they're terrified. Completely terrified. The room will be corners. Until you get them to tell a personal story. This is really important. Not a political story, not a didactic story. The real messy, the beautiful sort of multitudinous, Whitman-esque messiness comes in personal storytelling. So they will tell each other a story, and then suddenly the boy from Kentucky will realize, wow, that girl who's wearing the hijab from the South Bronx is a bit more like me than I thought, because beneath her hijab she's wearing AirPods, and guess what, she's listening to Beyonce's most recent album, and I'm listening to Beyonce's most recent album. And she's looking at him and saying, wow, that kid with the pickup truck and the gun in the back of the pickup truck, I never saw a white kid before who was so poor that he had to shoot rabbits, that he had to bring back to his family to eat. And then suddenly they get into this territory where things are more nuanced, and you don't know all about this. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about narrative. It's also what we talk about when we talk about hospitality. Because when you exchange a story with someone else, you're not only giving a part of yourself, but you're also receiving what they give to you, and then giving it back to them. So these are a series of psychological exchanges that occur, and then we ask the young people, you know, in what way can you sort of do these programs, perhaps, that can change things on the ground. So maybe the kids in Kentucky might start an opioid awareness group, because all of their stories had to do with opioid abuse. And maybe these kids in the South Bronx start to work with Kohler Hospital, which actually happened, where there are gunshot victims, and they work with gunshot victims in exchanging stories. And suddenly the community grows and grows and grows. Now, I will tell you that during COVID, and there was a Kentucky principal died, was one of the first ones. The kids in the South Bronx who'd gone through these exchanges, they were immediately in touch with us in floods of tears, thinking that maybe it was one of the people that they had met, and they formed these relationships with one another, breaking down borders, breaking down stereotypes, working with one another, making the world slightly messier. Because stories are messy, right? And they're not singular. And that's where Narrative 4 came from, and you know, where we're working nowadays. Countries all over the world, we're in 40% of Irish schools, for instance. The schools are really, really, really important. And we're moving into colleges now and so on. So hopefully we will DC in a significant way sometime soon.
Great. I'm sure there are many questions, and I forgot to say at the outset that, you know, one of the main purposes of this evening is to have question and answer with you all. So I'm just kind of setting it up with this opening set of questions with Colum. Question I'd like to ask you about is the ethics of exchanging stories. And I'll just give you an example that we ran into, Sheila and I, when we were asking young people from different communities to exchange their stories. And for the most part it worked, but we had several situations, and I'll cite the examples, where we've got panic-stricken telephone calls saying, please take the video down from the website. And one of the cases was two students who Sheila's actually here in Studio Art, one Japanese, one Korean, did a wonderful little video where they exchanged their stories, with their iPhones, two separate split screens, and one said, I'm from Japan, and the Dokdo Islands belong to us in terms of history. We've owned them for the last 300 years. Went through the whole story. And then he said, I'm whatever, and I'm from Korea, and the Dokdo Islands belong to Korea. He gave his version. At the end, they did this comic strip dance with a Lady Gaga song where they started fighting, and then it turned into an embrace. And they declared at the end of it that the Dokdo Islands, which were there for this source of conflict for 500 years between Japan and Korea, should be declared, their aspiration as two young people, 18 years old, studying art, as a demilitarized zone and a bird sanctuary. And there are actually 16 different types of migratory birds in the Dokdo Islands. In any case, all fine. It was one of our first videos. It was shown places all over the world, downloaded in schoolrooms and whatnot. And the next thing is we had a call from the Japanese girl to say, I'm back in Tokyo, I can't get a job. Because every time I go for a job, they look at my name, the video comes up, and they see me as a traitor because I've suddenly, said that we can trade the Dokdo Islands with our Korean enemies. So that was one small example. Another, very briefly, was a Syrian refugee who did a wonderful exchange with a Turkish student, and again we were ready to post, and he emailed us and said, please, I can't go ahead, can't sign the permission because of my papers. I may not get a paper because I'm illegal in Turkey. And there were a few other examples. Well, one final one was a Serb and a Croatian who'd grown up in the same school in Vukovar, which subsequently led to great conflict. And they decided to get together to exchange their stories from the Serb and Croat point of view. And that proved to be a very successful video, but one, they were not able to sit in the same room. They wanted to. They were not able to sit in the same room because it would have been considered treason by their respective communities. And that ran for about 6 months, and then they asked it to be removed. They were getting pressure. So that's a situation where, for us, we go from stories, exchanging stories on the ground in conflicting situations, conflictual situations, to posting it on the website. Now, have you ever had that problem? Do you work more with people talking one-to-one, and then maybe pen and paper exchange, but less on video, or?
Yeah, we don't do. Look, this shit is dangerous.
Yeah.
Like, stories are dangerous.
Yeah.
Stories can take your country away. Stories can take your house away. Stories can take your identity away. No, the idea that they're dealing in stories and it's somehow up in the air and kumbaya. It ain't that way. It takes a lot of courage to sit down and to tell your story, to tell someone else's story. I don't believe in storytelling personally as a direct conflict resolution tool. I think you can go at it slant, like you do with fiction. You tell things slant, you go at it in another way. We're in Israel and we're in Palestine, right? We're in Gaza, we're in the West Bank. What we will do is we'll work within the West Bank, but then we will, introduce those kids in the West Bank, kids from Chicago, kids from here, and sort of try to create this thing where it's not, you're not going to ask kids from East Belfast and West Belfast to sit down with one another and pretend it's all hunky-dory, because even after 27 years of peace, it's still not entirely hunky-dory, and you put people in awkward situations. But you can change things in East Belfast by exchanging within East Belfast, and then then with Galway, and then maybe with Birmingham, and
and then eventually people go back into the community and they're changed. We also don't make any of the stories public. So it's what happens in the room stays in the room. And then we hope that the change that is affected there goes out into their life. But this is the thing. How do you hold on to people? How do you make sure that they, that they become part of the continuum? Because as I said, this stuff can be dangerous. Now, if we wanted to publish stuff, and we've done stuff on gun violence and so on, we would go to the kids and would say, are you, and go to the parents and get, but I find that the real beauty comes in that moment that surprises them both, and kids will come to you and say, oh, I don't have a story, man. And you'd be like, yeah, you have a story. And then suddenly they said, oh wow, I do have a story, and someone's actually listening to me. Now the other thing that can happen is people can get it wrong. You tell, hi, my name is Richard, and I'm from France, I'm from Belfast, or you can, so people can get things wrong, but it's okay because the world gets things wrong, and so you can sort of use that moment to examine why people maybe haven't. But we find that in general, people treat one another's stories, even if they are going close to a divide, like Kentucky, the South Bronx, with enormous respect, because they've given someone their own story. And this is the thing, and this is why I love this idea that we're talking tonight about hospitality. Because what is hospitality? What is the open door? Because we're living in a time when all the doors are being closed, and all the curtains are being closed, and the windows are being shut down, and like everyone has to come into the house if you look like me or you sound like me or you vote like me, but otherwise don't. And that's a real problem, because really what you want to do is to be able to open up all those canals of certainty, because they are canals. They have been dug. They are man-made. They are directed to go a certain place. There's not rivers of certainty, because the rivers can be unpredictable. So we have this disease of certainty in our culture right now. We all know it. We see it just even in the past few months. Everyone's so certain. But I really am fond of the notion of saying I don't know, or wow, that throws me into a little bit of throws me off balance a little bit. And I find that this is a literary exercise. So why I love doing it and why I think it's profoundly important is because it helps me in my literature, but it also helps because we do have this organization that's growing and growing in and around the world. But I think there's no one particular way. There's loads of organizations doing amazing things. You guys are doing amazing things. I was looking at the stuff online, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. So there's no one absolute solution.
I want to get on to the relationship between your fiction and, so to speak, narrative 4, which is arguably dealing with histories more than fictions. But before we move on to that, the relationship of story and history, could you just say a word about how it works in classrooms?
Okay, well, first of all, teachers, they're my heroes.
Right.
So I've been traveling a lot again recently, and you know the way you go to the airport and they say, somebody in military uniform, active military duty, with your active military card, please go on playing. And I'm cool with that. These people, I have no problem with that. I'm not going to create a fuss about that. But I can't wait until the day that the teachers are asked to put, their union card or whatever on the day and you get on. Look, well, why should it not be the day? My question is, why should it not be the day?
No, it's there,
right? Yeah, so it would be fantastic if it could happen. Because these are the ones who are at the coalface of democracy. So teachers are the ones, and look, I've been a teacher. I think everybody who's been a teacher, even everyone who's been a student, can recognize how scary it is to be a teacher. Can you imagine sometimes going into high school thinking, I don't have my stuff together today. what am I going to do? I'm facing 30 kids and they're going to say, and you constantly got to be on your guard and do all these things. So for me, the teachers should be better paid, should be better looked after, should be better respected. I don't understand why we don't have that in our culture. I think Ireland is slightly better, and I think the education system is more open. So you see progressive things happening in Ireland that are not happening over here. But in a classroom, how it actually happens is that the teacher brings these kids together, and the kids are like, "Oh, you know, I don't want to do this," and then when they do it, they become proponents of it, because they realize that there's a chemistry, there's a magic, there's a physics, there's like all of this thing that's happening between people, and then the teachers find other teachers, and we have master practitioners, and we facilitate the exchange of these stories within schools, between towns, between counties, between countries. And my eventual idea is that we will have a platform which we've been building, not entirely successfully, but we will be successful soon, where we will have a platform where schools will go in and we will have a safe place for people to exchange between Croatia and Limerick, or between Boston and Japan, or whatever else it happens to be.
Right.
This lattice work.
Yeah, but the magic formula, it seems to me, in Narrative 4 is not just telling your story to the other person and listening to the other person, but repeating the story to the other person.
Yeah.
That's
Not like a tape recorder either.
Yeah.
So, like, I get freaked out. Honestly, I've been doing this for years. I still get freaked out when I'm about to do an exchange. People think, "Oh, you've done it loads of times." But no, I still get nervous because I want to hold somebody else's story. I want to be true to their experience. And people I've exchanged stories with down through the years, I have never forgotten them in any way. You know, like it's a powerful tool.
it works.
Yeah, it works. It actually,
Yeah.
look, test scores, South Bronx, test scores go up, empathy levels go up, absentee levels go down. There are all these things. We have head people, I don't say headmasters, that's not a word we use anymore, like principals, who, attest to the fact that their schools have been changed because they can use this. This is not the only program. Let's not pretend that Narrative 4 is going to go in and solve everything in your life, in your school, and that. But it's one of the things that starts these little the atoms to tremble at the edge, and things will start.
And there are statistics out there. I saw on your website that Yale and Chicago have done work on this.
Absolutely.
It works.
Oh, it absolutely works. Yale's gone in, Mark Brackett, like one of the great, leaders, when talking about compassion and empathy, he's looked at what we do. Many academics, people have been skeptical about our stuff too, have looked at it and said, "Oh wow, okay." And the real question is, how do you continue this empathy all the way down the road, the next day, the next week, the next year? This is a question that we're studying.
But it's not self-centered empathy, it's radical empathy.
It's radical.
And radical is important.
Yeah.
That's where the mess comes in.
Yeah, that's where the mess comes in, and I say to people, this is tough stuff. This is really tough stuff. And so
And dangerous and transformative.
It's dangerous, yes, and transformative. Thank you. Yeah.
So let's move on to your own writing and your most recent book, American Mother, which is a remarkable story for those of you who don't already know about it, of the mother of Jim Foley, who was executed by ISIS. One of the most iconic images, I suppose, and viral in our century. 2014. And the mother of Jim Foley contacted Colum. It's very interesting, actually, how you did meet once and was exchanging a photograph, and then you met 7 years later. I'd love you to tell that story, actually. But they wrote this book together. Well, you wrote it with her, and it's about many things, but essentially her encounter with the assassin of her son, Alexander Cody, who was, I think, brought to America, was in prison. So, would you say something about that, and then I have some follow-up questions for you.
So you all were there. I mean, virtually everyone in the room would have been there. Some of you would have been kids at the time. But in 2014, in your inbox came a picture of a man in the Syrian desert in an orange jumpsuit with another man beside him in a black jumpsuit and a balaclava holding a knife. Later image that came, and I apologize to people. Well, no, I don't even need to tell you what the later image was. We all know what happened to Jim. On the same day, however, my inbox got flooded with another image from friends who were researching Jim Foley, and said, "Have you seen this photograph?" And I opened it up trepidatiously. I didn't know what was going on, and it was Jim Foley sitting in the bunker. Turned out to be in Afghanistan, surrounded by sandbags, and he's reading a book, right? And then so I focused in on the book, and it was Let the Great World Spin, a novel that I had written in 2009. And can you imagine then what that did to my head? Because on one hand, look, he's reading this stuff, on the other hand, you know, he's being killed. And so I remember holding those images, and then I saw Diane Foley a couple of months later on CNN. I thought, this is the mother, she was really together, she was really quite fantastic. And I thought, wow, I'm going to write to her. And so I found out a reliable email address from a very reliable source. And who said she'll definitely get the email. Wrote her a long email, long letter. Hi, you know, if ever you want somebody to write about your son and or yourself, I would be honored to do so. Didn't hear back. Then I saw, a few months later, she had gotten a contract to write a book in the New York Times, and sorry, Diane Foley has it, and she's going to write her own memoir. I was like, fine, cool, leave well enough alone, step away from that idea, and then I went into my book at Paragon and spent the next 5 years working on that. 7 years after Jim's death, I'm on a Zoom talking with Marquette College, talking about my novel Paragon, and somebody said, by the way, did you ever see the photograph of Jim Foley reading your book? I said, yes, I did. By the way, I also wrote to Diane Foley. They said, you won't believe this. Diane Foley's on this call right now. I call her up an hour later, and I talked to her, and she said, oh, I never got your letter.
No.
You never got my letter. Oh. And then she said to me, by the way, I wasn't able to write your book. And I said, look, and I kind of think through this whole narrative core stuff, whatever, I know how to structure things, right? Beckett says it's the job of the artist now to find a form that accommodates the mess, right? There's the one thing I think I can do. Well, I can find a form for a box to put people's stories in. I said, okay, I'm going to drive up, I'm going to come see you. I will help you find a way to tell your story. I go up there, I'm there for 2 days. On the first day, she tells me, oh, and by the way, my son's killer was arrested in Syria, stripped of his British citizenship because he was Cockney from London, taken down to Virginia, has copped a plea instead of taking a trial, and part of his plea agreement is that he will talk to the victims and or the families of victims. And guess who was a victim, really? Diane was a victim. She wanted to go down to talk to him in a prison/courthouse in Virginia. Her husband didn't want to go, her kids didn't want to go. She said, would you go? And I said, yeah, I'll go. And a couple of months later, we walked into this big courthouse room in Virginia, probably about 4 times the size of this room, right? And no windows, because they were afraid of missiles coming in and like bullets or whatever else. In the center of the courthouse, high security, FBI, CIA, prosecution,
fence, and she, Diane Foley, 73 years old, walks across the room, stands in front of her son's killer. He's wearing shackles on his ankles, he's got a jumpsuit on. He looks up at her and she says, "Hi Alexander, it's nice to meet you." From there, we spend the next 2 days, and then 6 months later we spend another full day talking with him. And the most amazing stuff happened and emerged from that particular conversation. So it's not least about forgiveness and compassion.
Wasn't there a moment where she touched his hand?
Yeah.
And he said, she's the mother of us all.
Yeah. So this whole thing was like, he's not allowed to touch, because of his faith, he's not allowed to touch the hand of a woman who's not his daughter or his wife or his mother. And Diane comes and extends her hand to shake his hand, and he takes her hand. It's an extraordinary thing, an extraordinary moment of forgiveness and beauty, and it's one of the most powerful things that I personally have ever seen.
So, fiction and history. I was watching one of the conversations you had with Diane, the interview, and the question came up as to how in the writing of the book you're obviously telling the facts, right? Telling the history of Jim's life and what happened to him and the encounter with Diane and the assassin. But you're also fictionalizing at times, getting into his head, and it's going from third to first person back now. So she says to you at one point, be careful of embellishing, right? with great humor. But how did you handle that? I mean, I think of the fact that in most vernacular languages, Geschichte, Histoire, the same word for story and history. They're so linked. Aristotle tries to separate them out in the Poetics. He says history deals with facts and the chronicling of facts, but fiction, for him, Osman Mesa's plot, gets to the essence of things, right? So he makes a big difference between history and poetics. But you don't. You bring the two together.
Yeah.
So could you say a bit about that?
Oh man, how many hours do we have to talk about this? Are we ready? Because my notion is that facts are mercenary things. Facts can be used and shipped off to whatever orphanage of truth you want them to go to, right? And you can see facts manipulated by different sides, the exact same fact manipulated, and you do see it nowadays, and in extraordinary ways. And this whole idea that we're in this post-truth era, what is true, what is not true, how can we believe these things? And so I've come to the notion that it's not unique, and it probably comes down from philosophy many times over, and it's not very smart even. But I do think that the ineffable things have now become the facts of where we happen to be. So the things that are impossible to wrap a fact around, like love and pride and pity and compassion and sacrifice and violence and so on, are the things that are now the actual facts of our contemporary experience. You can't wrap a fact around the notion of love. Or maybe something can. But think about it. Can you give me a fact about sacrifice? Can you give me a fact about compassion? It's a thing that trills in the air. It's ineffable. This then is the job of the writer to turn these things into the factual basis of where we happen to be. And so, for me, there's no difference between fiction and non-fiction. All of it becomes a story, and sometimes you can manipulate what you know. Well, there are certain facts. There are certain unalienable facts, right? So, for example, not so much with the Diane Foley story, but with the Paragon, for instance. So, a Paragon is a novel that I wrote about an Israeli and a Palestinian. One of the opening scenes is a man on a motorbike going through Jerusalem. He's a 70-year-old man, and I was on that actual motorbike, right? But this is called a novel.
calls me up afterwards after reading the novel. He says, I love all this stuff that you're doing, but I've got to tell you got something wrong. Shit. It's like, he said, you have me on the wrong motorbike. And I'm like, yeah, I know you're on, I did that on purpose. He said, but look, because Rami, he rode an automatic, right? And a BMW automatic, and I used to ride a motorbike, and automatics are boring anyway, right? But instead of him being on an automatic, I put him on a bike with gears, because I like the words clutch. I like the word, I like the way you move the foot, the left foot, the right foot. So I actually wanted to put the reader on the bike. So to me, it was more truthful for the reader to be on the bike than for Rami to be on an automatic. And so there are these things that are going on, but ultimately, is it true? Yeah. Ultimately, does he drive that way? Yes. But I want us to be there. And so it's like transporting us into that sort of weird, ineffable honesty that goes on with stuff. A little bit with that, with Diane, she policed me much more. This is actually my first piece of nonfiction, American Mother. So she would call me up and say, Colum. But I do push it a little bit every now and then. Like I have her standing by her fridge and contemplating things when she opens the fridge and she's looking for something. And she said, well, I don't remember opening the fridge. I said, well, Diane, you obviously opened the fridge at some point
in your life.
Yeah. She said, well, that photograph mightn't have been on the fridge. I said, I don't care if the photograph was or wasn't on the fridge. That photograph is part of your life, and I want the reader to experience what's going on. But this is the act of generosity. She understood that. She understood that you can take. Sometimes you can take the life out of the truth by being entirely truthful.
Speaking of photographs, it strikes me as incredibly moving and ironic that the photograph that you got that fateful day was of Jim Foley reading your book, Great World Spins, which is about a grieving mother for her son. In fact, two grieving mothers for their two sons in Vietnam. And then a paragon is two fathers grieving their daughters. So there's a lot of grieving, a lot of grief in both stories. And can storytelling, be it non-fiction or fiction, be redemptive? At one point, I remember Diane Foley saying that the book, the story of Jim, which you told, and brought him back to life with it.
Yeah. Look, I'll tell you, I walked into a room in 2015, November 2015, I'm in Beit Jala, which some of you know is like in Bethlehem, which is right beside Jerusalem. I walked into this room, there's two men sitting on opposite ends of the table, and they told me stories about how they lost their daughters. One's Israeli, one's Palestinian. I was in floods of tears. I really was, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. I thought I was really tough, and the whole, for 2 weeks beforehand and seeing all the stuff that was going on. But then they wrote on a napkin, use the force of your grief as a weapon. For me, they wrote this down, right? And I thought, okay, wow, well that's really sort of a spectacular thing. And can you use the force of the grief as a weapon? Because there's also great joy there too. I don't want to pretend that it's all about this grief that is going on. Rami and Bassam are like great pals. They love each other. They have this extraordinary relationship with one another. But Diane then too. And halfway through the writing of a paragon, something happened to me. I didn't even know who the narrator of the book was. Right? I had no clue. I was going mad. I was like, I don't want to be the narrator of the book. That's boring. I don't want to be the narrator of the book. And then suddenly realized that the two men were telling the stories of their daughters in order to keep their daughters alive. There was something Scheherazadian about it. And then I realized that they were telling it to a group of people, and the group of people was us in general. So it's either the stupidest thing or the cleverest thing that I've had revealed to me in literature, that that the narrator of that actual book was the reader of the book. But the narrator of the reader of every book becomes the narrator of every book, surely, or do they? And this is part of the tension then for me. Is that the way it is? And then with the Diane Foley book, though, it was different.
Yeah.
She's the narrator of the story, and I'm the narrator outside.
But when you're writing a paragon, you have more poetic license in a way,
Yeah.
and you can go into fiction more easily.
Right.
But it's not as if history disappears. I mean, you give us a lot of facts,
Right.
and you've got your whole sort of leitmotif of the migratory birds.
Right.
So that's all there, almost scientific objectivity at one level, and then you've got this movement into almost stream of consciousness, interior first person, through Rami and Bassam. And that seems to be very important. The fiction plays a very important role, a very central role in a paragon.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, because we all make it up.
Yeah.
You know, we all make it up at some stage or other. Have you ever told a story the same way, like 2 times? Have you ever, depending on your audience and all of these sort of things, like so much of it is about how we. The word fiction means to shape, right? From fetus but non-fiction is as shaped as fiction happens to be. And so what then comes down to is what we're just talking about, the elemental truth of things.
Do you know that fiction and fact have the same root in Latin? Fingo, fingere, ficti, fictum. So fiction and fact.
I remember the word fingere because I remember thinking that's a rude sounding.
Back to a paragon. So the title, as many of you may already know, it's a figure or shape with multiple.
Cavity into a number of sides.
Exactly. And the book itself is divided up into 1001 sections after the 1001 nights of the Arabian Tales. So there's a real shaping going on.
Yes.
Right? There's real shaping going on. And the story, I think, is very redemptive. And a question I have, thinking about what we're going to talk about tonight, when Gaza is what Gaza is, and the Middle East is what it is, where are Rami and Bassam now?
Oh, wow.
Can they still exchange stories?
I'm really happy that you asked me that question. I get asked it a lot. How are Rami and Bassam? They are the best of friends. October the 7th, Bassam called Rami and said, look, if you need a place to stay, you come to Jericho to me. Post October the 7th, when stuff was going down a week or 2 later, Rami calls Bassam and says, you come to either to Haifa or to Jerusalem, and I will look after you. They are the best of friends. They are still the best of friends. And they said they would not change a word of what they have been talking about for the past 10 to 20 years. They would not change their opinions on things whatsoever. They're very simple messages. We don't have to love each other. We don't have to even like each other the way that we could, but we must understand each other. Because if we don't understand each other, then we're doomed. And also they are anti-occupation. That occupation is the elephant in the room for both of them. And they say nothing will change until the occupation stops. And they're quite forceful about this. They're still traveling the world, but guess what? They can't get into the United States. Rami can't get into the Bassam can't get into.
Why?
They are denied visas.
Because of the book.
No, not because of the book. Because of whatever the administration. Frankly, I think it was hangover from the Trump administration, but the Biden administration hasn't done anything about it either. And they were allowed actually over for the launch of a Paragon in 2020, and then the visas stopped. And stuff. It's a source of angst for me.
But do you think if Rami and Bassam hadn't exchanged their stories and lived each other's stories of their respective daughters dying in appallingly tragic circumstances, if they hadn't had that exchange of stories and sharing of stories, and your book is the fruition of it in many respects, could they have retained a friendship? Could there have been a friendship without that storytelling?
Not without the storytelling.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
not without the story. And this is what's incredibly important. That this is how they break down the barriers, because it's not about scoring points didactically in terms of I'm going to say this about Palestine, I'm going to say this about Israel, and so on. No, it's about the emotional connection that comes about through the messiness of the stories that are brought them together, and they're incredible people. I would love for them to come back. Like, can you imagine them coming to it's very difficult to refute what they say on when they come to college campuses, because they're both very powerful and they're both lost in extraordinary ways, and they both recognize one another. And it's not about balancing. People think this is a relationship about two people who are balancing one another out. No. They're both very much anti-occupation and radically different at the same time too. One fought for 3 wars in Israel. The other spent 7 years in an Israeli jail. He was the commander of Fatah, the commander of the unit in prison.
Right.
And yet they're able to look at one another, and they can also disagree with one another.
Yeah.
So, and they're funny too.
Yeah, very. Humor is important.
It is. Okay, some people don't like this, but I said something. Like when Rami and Bassam, I saw them in a restaurant recently, and it was a rainy night, and Rami's a little bit bigger than Bassam, and we're squeezing into this. We're going to a pub, and we're squeezing into this little or restaurant. Because Bassam is going to a pub, but a restaurant with a pub. Squeezing into these little cubicles, and Rami's trying to get his jacket off like this, and he's like, oh, I can't get it off. And Bassam just reaches across very agilely and says, haven't the Jews suffered enough? Takes off, and they laugh at each other.
I'm going to open it to the floor very soon. There's one kind of curious point I wanted to raise with you. I was struck in one of the interviews you had with Diane Foley, where she talks about you getting that photograph, right, where her son is reading a book, and she sees something almost a gesture of grace or spiritual coincidence or something. And reading a Paragon, there are moments like that, for example, some of them kind of rather sad. It's the same hospital where one of the daughters is born and the other dies, right? And that's just one of those strange, tragic coincidences. Then Philippe Petit shows up in Great Presbyterian, and then he's in the Hebron Valley.
Yeah.
And
George Mitchell is there too.
And George Mitchell is there, and he's in Transatlantic.
Right, yeah.
And so there's these strange felicities and coincidences and resonances between the books, where people are walking in and out of different stories. I mean, that's funny at one level? Is it kind of spiritual at another level? Is it comic? Is it what?
Wow, that's a beautiful question. I suppose it's all. It could be all of those, right? It's kind of comic in a way. It's coincidental, but maybe there is something deeply spiritual about how these stories meet one another, and maybe that's what we're talking about when we talk about narrative hospitality. How do we meet one another? John Berger used to talk a lot about that. How do we meet ourselves through others, and when suddenly we turn and we look at something that we didn't really know before, does the human experience expand in certain ways? And look, I think governments are fiercely invested in not letting their people know about their neighbours, or certainly about their enemies. And if they did know,
there wouldn't be the same levels of and all of this is about money. It's about fear, it's about territories, it's about land, and you know, one of the biggest real estate grabs that's going on, say for example, in the West Bank is fueled by money. And so how do you fuel that? You fuel the fear, and by you you know, you take away textbooks from kids, you take away the ability for all sides, and not both sides, for all sides to demonize and dehumanize one another. Rami did not think of Palestinians as human. He admits to this until he was in his 40s, and he saw a Palestinian woman who'd suffered the same way that he had suffered. This is kind of incredible. Think about it a moment. Dehumanized to a point where a Palestinian was a person who came on a Saturday to fix your fridge. That was, or maybe cut your lawn or whatever. And this is not the way that look, what are we going to do in our education system? What are we going to do with stories? What are we going to do with narrative hospitality? We're going to invite people in who are not like us, and we're going to make changes. It's the only way we're going to do it.
And it has to be radical. I mean, you talk about radical empathy. One of our books is called Radical Hospitality.
Yeah.
Because hospitality and empathy become very easily pretty empty words.
Okay.
And that's what
Can I
goes
tell you
to-
something?
Yeah.
A little bit of a secret right now.
Mhm.
I'm not using the word radical because I don't want to look. We get. I want to bring those people from Kentucky in, and I want to bring right wing and left wing people together. And like, even the word empathy doesn't work in certain segments of the population now. So I got to be careful. I'll talk about compassion because I want people to come into the room. And the kids aren't scared. The parents are scared.
Yeah.
They're scared of those sort of words. They use the word, "Oh, look, that guy's radical," and so. You know,
But it doesn't have to be political. I mean, it can be radical is going to the root radical.
But even just use
yes,
the
I know.
word.
I know.
You
It has a connotation.
You've got to be so
That
careful.
can close doors.
Yeah. And you don't want the doors to be closed.
No.
Try to kick. Look, it's our job right now to open. I got a really nice email the night after the election. Like tonight we'll try to figure things out. Tomorrow we write it down. And I just like that notion. You know, we write it down and we get out and do something.
Now comes our moment of the award, and I think it's patently, powerfully, dramatically obvious why Sheila and I and the guest book committee chose Colum McCann as our recipient for this year. You witnessed his commitment, his extraordinary commitment to the whole process of narrative hospitality, not just in theory but in action. So, Sheila, I would just ask you to present the award.
I will, but I first want to say,
Yes, please.
I want to really thank both of you right now for this incredible. To Colum, this is no gold medal.
No,
But again, it's an appreciation for reminding all of us that stories are everywhere, they're everyone's, but it's up to us to make them vehicles of transformational compassion. So thank you.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.